Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'll be delivering both the call to action and the Washington report this week. Let's get right to it. The House is out for the week and will return next Monday. The Senate will come back today and stay in session through Thursday. Last week in the House, which had been back home for the scheduled 4th of July recess, came back into session on Wednesday to consider the Senate amendment to H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. After a series of procedural votes, one of which was held open for more than 9 hours as a group of House conservatives negotiated with House Republican leaders and the White House seeking assurances, the House finally passed the rule governing floor consideration of the bill at about 3:23 a.m. Thursday morning. Then the House began debate on the bill, and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries used what is called the magic minute to show the Democrat base he was doing everything he could to stop the bill. The magic minute is a House tradition in which the leaders of the two parties are allowed to speak for as long as they want. The timekeeper just stops the clock and says that they've spoken for 1 minute, when in reality they speak for as long as they want. At that point, of course, the deals had been cut, and everybody knew the bill was going to pass. So all Jeffries could do was talk. So he talked, and he talked, and he talked. He talked for so long that he set a new record for the longest speech in history on the House floor. And then they voted, and the bill passed by a margin of 218 to 214, with only 2 Republicans, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania and Thomas Massie of Kentucky, voting against it. And then they were done. This week in the House, in a change to the schedule that was laid out at the beginning of the year, the House is back home for a district work period this week. Next votes in the House will take place next Monday, July 14. Last week in the Senate, as we discussed last week, the Senate stayed in session over the weekend, working on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. On Monday morning, with the Senate having voted on all the relevant procedural matters, the vote-a-rama began. More than 25 hours later, after the Senate had voted on 48 different amendments and motions, the longest vote-a-rama in the Senate's history, it ended with Senate passage of its amended version of H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, by a vote of 50 to 50. With Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. All Democrats voted against the bill. 3 Republicans voted against it, too. Maine's Susan Collins, Kentucky's Rand Paul, and North Carolina's Thom Tillis. Collins and Tillis voted against it because they believed it cut too much in the way of Medicaid spending, while Paul opposed it because it contained an increase in the debt limit of $5 trillion. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will return on Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on a motion to end debate on the nomination of Preston Griffith to serve as Undersecretary of Energy. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of Brian Bedford to serve as Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, Scott Cooper to serve as Director of the Office of Personnel Management, and William Briggs to serve as Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Now to rescissions. The Senate still has to consider the rescissions package sent over by the House. Both houses have until July 18, that's a week from this Friday, to pass the bill and get it to the president's desk, or else the president will be required by law to spend the money he's asking the Congress to rescind. The Senate has apparently decided not to simply take the House-passed measure and put it on the floor. That's because Senate Majority Leader John Thune isn't sure he's got 50 votes in his conference to pass it. For example, Maine's Susan Collins, who happens to be the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, has said she has concerns over the bill's cuts to funding for the president's emergency program for AIDS relief, which has been sending money to fight HIV/AIDS in Africa since the administration of President George W. Bush created the program more than 2 decades ago. So the Senate leadership decided not to hold a formal markup of the measure. Instead, a motion to discharge the measure from the Appropriations Committee ripens today. That is, it becomes privileged today, which means any senator can call it up for a floor vote. But we don't expect that vote to occur until next week at the earliest. That would give the Senate roughly 2 days using expedited procedures to pass a revised rescissions package. The process ends with a vote-a-rama. Yes, a second one, even though we just had one, leading to a vote on a GOP leadership drafted substitute amendment. Then the Senate would ping the measure back to the House, leaving House leaders virtually no time to do anything other than pass the Senate's version of the rescissions package and send it to the president. No ponging back to the Senate. Stay tuned. Now to tariffs. In early April, President Trump declared what he called Liberation Day and announced what he called reciprocal tariffs against virtually every trading partner the United States has, except, oddly, for Russia. Maybe we'll get back to that at some point in the future because it is odd, but for now, we'll set that little factoid aside and move on. The tariffs President Trump declared in early April ranged from a minimum of 10% against all goods imported from the target country to as high as 145% against goods imported from China. The financial sector revolted. Stock indices like the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the Standard & Poor's 500 dropped precipitously. In a matter of days, the value of companies traded on the New York Stock Exchange dropped by $6 trillion. And then the bond market turned upside down when yields on U.S. Treasuries began to climb. The U.S. Treasury bond is known as the safest investment in the world. It is the benchmark against which all other investments are judged, for the simple reason that the financial world believes, axiomatically, that if the world ever gets to the place where the U.S. government's ability to pay its debts is threatened, then all bets are off everywhere on everything. And when the yield on U.S. Treasury bonds begins to rise, that means that the people who sell U.S. Treasury notes can't do it without making those bonds more attractive. So they raise the yield. It was at that moment that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke to President Trump, and after some discussion, President Trump announced a week after announcing his reciprocal tariffs that he would pause them across the board and set a 90-day deadline for all the U.S. trading partners to strike new trade deals. White House advisor Peter Navarro, one of the Trump administration's strongest proponents of tariffs, pivoted rather nicely and, ignoring centuries of historical experience that teaches that trade deals are hard-fought things that normally take years to negotiate, boasted that the administration would secure 90 deals in 90 days. Wednesday will mark the 90-day trade deal cutoff. To date, the Trump administration has announced trade deals with the United Kingdom and Vietnam, though details on the UK deal, at least, are a bit sketchy, to say the least, with a back-down trade deal with China, in which both sides climbed down from their early April tariffs against each other as they continue to talk about the desired but elusive big deal. And that's it. No trade deals with the European Union, the third largest market in the world, nothing with Latin America or Africa or other Asian countries. Trade deals typically take years, not 3 months, to negotiate. Consequently, it surprised absolutely no one in the financial sector when Treasury Secretary Bessent, appearing on CNN's State of the Union yesterday, announced that tariffs will revert back to their April 2 rates on August 1 for countries that failed to lock down trade deals with the U.S. before then. He said letters would be delivered to about 100 U.S. trade partners today, this afternoon. Quote, saying that if you don't move things along, then on August 1st, you will boomerang back to your April 2nd tariff level. Though it certainly looks and sounds as if the administration is setting a new deadline, a delayed deadline, Bassett insists otherwise. We're saying this is when it's happening, he said. If you want to speed things up, have at it. If you want to go back to the old rate, that's your choice, he said, where what he describes as the old rate is the rate that was set on April 2, when the reciprocal tariffs were first announced. Now to the reconciliation bill. Well, they did it. They passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and got it to the president's desk by July 4, as they had boasted they would do, like Joe Namath predicting a Jets upset victory in Super Bowl III and then delivering, or Babe Ruth calling his shot in Game 3 of the 1932 World Series. An awful lot of people were quite sure that passing a bill as big and complicated as this one is simply could not be done in such a short time frame. They're now eating crow. The bill is the legislative centerpiece of President Trump's second-term domestic agenda. It includes $120 billion in additional defense spending, $85 billion for construction of the border wall, more ICE and Border Patrol agents, and more immigration judges and immigration courts. It makes permanent the 2017 Trump tax cuts. The doubled standard deduction is increased by $1,500 and made permanent. The doubled child tax credit is increased by $200 and permanently extended. The small business tax cut, the deduction for qualified business income, that's 199A, is permanently extended and enhanced. There's now permanent 100% expensing. There's increased dollar limitations for expensing, Section 179. The bill permanently expands research and development expensing. It permanently restores pro-growth interest deductibility. There's new 100% expensing for new factories and qualified production property. On the death tax, there's permanent extension and increased exemption levels. There's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay, and an enhanced deduction for seniors. There's no tax on the interest you pay on a car loan for a car made in the United States. The bill expands health savings accounts. The bill repeals the IRS 1099-K Venmo tax paperwork nightmare. It completely eliminates the $200 transfer tax on suppressors for firearms. The bill adds a permanent deduction on charitable contributions for non-itemizers, and it extends the paid family and medical leave credit. In addition, the bill includes a $5 trillion increase in the debt limit, so Congress will not have to increase the debt limit until after the 2026 midterm elections, which means the Democrats won't have an opportunity to bargain on that subject. And another way of looking at it is backwards, or in a mirror maybe. That is, what passage of this bill does not do. The passage of this bill means the biggest tax increase in American history will not take place. And that means every single Democrat who voted in both the House and the Senate, by voting against this bill, voted for the biggest tax increase in American history. If that's not a central point of differentiation between the two parties in next year's midterm elections, I'll eat my hat. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 128 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped last Friday, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with Vanessa Fora, Director of Programs and Empowerment for the Foundation for the Restoration of America. The two discuss the groundbreaking Citizenship Masterclass, helping legal immigrants become proud American citizens. Vanessa shares her personal immigration journey from Peru to the United States, explains why many legal residents struggle with the naturalization process, and details how her program equips future voters with a deep understanding of America's history, the Constitution, and conservative values. As always, it's highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. Actually, we're still doing multiple calls to action. There's still a lot going on in Congress now, and we need your help on multiple fronts. You'll be able to find the details on all this stuff on the front page of our website at teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org. There you'll find a slider that will take you to a page with all kinds of detail, but here's the general outline. We still need your help urging the Senate to move forward and move faster on confirming Trump nominees. But this week, we really want you to help us focus on getting the Senate to pass the rescissions package. Please call both your United States senators and urge them to pass the rescissions package as early as possible. This is very important. This package is only $9 billion for a reason. It's a test case. We've talked about this. A test case to see if both House and Senate are willing to pass a rescissions package. If they cannot pass this, we won't get any more rescissions packages from the White House. But if we do pass it, we'll see more and bigger rescissions packages. Well, that's our broadcast for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please take a moment to share this broadcast with your Facebook friends and post it to your other social media accounts. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, be well and be active. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to end debate on the nomination of Daniel Zimmerman to be an Assistant Secretary of Defense. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Paul Dabar to serve as Deputy Secretary of Commerce. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Kenneth Keyes to serve as an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. On Thursday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. On Friday, the Senate voted to reject a motion to discharge S.J. Res. 59 from the Committee on Foreign Relations. That was a joint resolution to direct the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress. The underlying measure was sponsored by Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine. The motion to discharge was rejected by a vote of 47 to 53. On Saturday evening, the Senate took up a motion to proceed to H.R. 1, the reconciliation bill. Early on, 50 votes were cast against the measure, including the votes of Republicans Rand Paul, Thom Tillis, and Ron Johnson. All the Democrats voted against the motion to proceed, so there were a total of 50 votes on the board against the bill. That meant that Majority Leader John Thune would have to win the votes of the remaining 50 Republicans. In very short order, 45 of them had cast their votes in favor, but there were still 5 votes outstanding, including the votes of Utah's Mike Lee, Wyoming's Cynthia Lummis, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, and Florida's Rick Scott. In the end, Ron Johnson switched his vote from no to yes, and all but Rand Paul and Thom Tillis voted for it. So the motion to proceed was agreed to by a vote of 51 to 49. At that point, we knew the next steps would include up to 20 hours of debate, followed by a vote-a-rama, in which any senator can offer an amendment as long as it is germane. The record from 2008